Imagine waking up one morning to find the world underwater. The sky black with rain, thunder shaking the earth, the sea rising higher and higher, swallowing mountains, forests, and cities. This terrifying vision has appeared in the myths of nearly every culture on Earth. But why? Were these just stories meant to scare children? Or are they memories of something real, a disaster so massive it left a permanent scar on humanity's collective memory? The most famous flood story is in the Bible. Noah builds an ark, gathers 2 of every animal, and survives a storm that lasts 40 days and 40 nights. When the waters finally recede, the ark lands on a mountain, and life begins again. But here's the strange part, nearly every ancient civilization tells the same story. In Mesopotamia, long before the Bible was written, the Epic of Gilgamesh spoke of a man named Utnapishtim who was warned by the gods about a coming flood. He builds a giant boat, fills it with animals, and rides out the storm until the world is safe again. The parallels are too close to ignore. Travel east to India, and you find the tale of Manu, a man who is warned by a mysterious talking fish about a great flood. The fish instructs him to build a boat and tie it to a giant horn that will pull him to safety as the waters rise. In China, there is the legend of Yu the Great, a hero who tames the floodwaters not by hiding from them but by working for years to channel them into rivers and canals. He becomes a king and is credited with founding China's first dynasty. Even in the Americas, thousands of miles from the Middle East, flood stories are everywhere. The Hopi people tell of a world destroyed by water because humanity had grown corrupt. The survivors climb to the top of a reed that grows into the sky, escaping the waters. The Inca speak of Viracocha, a god who sent a flood to wipe away the giants that once roamed the earth. In Mesoamerica, the Aztec tell of a man and woman who survived the flood by hiding in the trunk of a hollow cypress tree. Across the Pacific, in Polynesia, there are stories of a hero named Nu who builds a great canoe to survive a flood sent by angry gods. After the waters subside, he lands on a mountain and makes an offering to the creator. The Hawaiian version of the tale is nearly identical, and so is one told in distant New Zealand. These islands are separated by thousands of miles of ocean. Yet their myths are connected by the same theme, a world reset by water. Anthropologists have counted over 600 flood myths around the globe. They appear in places that had no contact with each other for thousands of years. Some describe torrential rains. Others speak of oceans rising without warning. A few even mention fire and ice accompanying the disaster, as if the earth itself was torn apart. What could explain this? One theory is that at the end of the last ice age, about 12,000 years ago, massive glaciers melted rapidly, causing sea levels to rise by hundreds of feet. Entire coastlines vanished. If humans were already living there, their villages and temples would have been swallowed by the sea. Underwater archaeology has discovered ruins off the coasts of India, Japan, and the Mediterranean. Cities that once stood on dry land are now submerged, covered in coral. Could these be the lost homes that inspired the flood myths? Imagine the trauma of watching the ocean devour your world. That memory would be passed down from generation to generation, first as stories, then as sacred myths. But there is another possibility. Some researchers believe the flood was triggered by something more dramatic, a comet impact or a series of meteor strikes that melted ice sheets and caused fires, floods, and mass extinctions. This is known as the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. Evidence shows a thin layer of black soil rich in carbon and tiny glass-like spheres found all over the world, dated to exactly 12,800 years ago. Something catastrophic happened. Whatever it was, it marked the end of the Ice Age and may have wiped out entire civilizations we no longer remember. Ancient texts sometimes hint that the flood was not just natural but intentional. In Mesopotamian myths, the gods decide to destroy humanity because humans had become too loud, too numerous. In the Bible, it is punishment for sin. In some Native American stories, the flood is a reset, a chance to start over. Could this be a metaphor for survival? Or could it suggest that ancient people believed some higher power was controlling these events? Imagine sitting by a fire thousands of years ago, hearing your grandmother tell you that once, long ago, the world drowned, that everyone except a chosen few was swept away. You would remember it. You would tell it to your children, and they would tell theirs. Over time, the story grows, changes, but the core remains: there was a flood. And it changed everything. Asterisk. Beneath the waves, there are hints that entire chapters of human history are still missing. Off the coast of India, near the city of Dwarka, divers have found the remains of what appears to be a massive ancient city. Streets, walls, and buildings lie submerged, encrusted with barnacles. Carbon dating suggests some of these structures could be 9,000 years old, far older than the pyramids of Egypt. This discovery shakes the timeline of history. If cities existed this far back, it means advanced civilizations were building and trading long before we believed possible. In Japan, near Yanaguni, mysterious stone terraces rise from the seafloor. They look like steps, platforms, and walls, as though they were once part of a vast ceremonial complex. Some scientists argue they are natural formations carved by water and time. But divers insist the lines are too sharp, the angles too precise. If this site was once above water, then it must have been built more than 10,000 years ago, again during the last great period of rising seas. And this is not limited to Asia. Off the coast of Cuba, sonar scans reveal massive geometric shapes, possibly pyramids, resting deep underwater. The structures are still being studied, but they fuel speculation that a thriving culture may have once existed on what is now the ocean floor. Could these ruins be the inspiration for the legend of Atlantis, the city swallowed by the sea in a single day and night? When we look closer at the flood myths themselves, we find details that are eerily consistent. Many stories mention a warning, someone who knows the flood is coming and builds a boat or finds a way to survive. This is not random. It suggests knowledge was passed down, perhaps from people who had already lived through one cataclysm and wanted future generations to be ready for the next. The idea of chosen survivors, a man, a family, a small group, shows up again and again. Why do so many cultures agree on this? In South America, the Muisca people of Colombia tell of a great flood caused by a god named Chibchacum as punishment for humanity's misdeeds. Another god, Bachica, appears on a rainbow and drains the waters by striking a rock, creating a waterfall that still exists today. This story blends moral lesson with a geological event, as if explaining why a particular landscape looks the way it does. In the Pacific Northwest of North America, tribes tell of a time when the ocean swallowed the land. They remember survivors who climbed to the tops of mountains, tying their canoes to the highest trees. Later, when the water fell, they descended and rebuilt their lives. Scientists have since found evidence of massive tsunamis in this region, caused by earthquakes along the Cascadia subduction zone. These events were so violent that entire coastlines sank and forests were buried underwater. What the myths describe may have been a real natural disaster, remembered for thousands of years. And then there are the flood stories that connect to the stars. Some Aboriginal groups in Australia describe a time when the sea level was much lower and coastal plains stretched far into what is now the ocean. They speak of following the stars to know when the waters would rise. Their oral traditions are so accurate that they match modern scientific maps of the ancient shoreline, proving that humans have been tracking and remembering these changes for more than 10,000 years. The question remains, were these floods simply natural disasters, or did they play a role in shaping human evolution? A catastrophe of this scale would wipe out entire populations but also force survivors to innovate, cooperate, and adapt. It could explain why we suddenly see an explosion of new cultures and technologies after the Ice Age. Perhaps the flood acted as a reset, pushing humanity into a new era. Even more intriguing is the possibility that knowledge from before the flood was preserved and passed on. The story of Noah includes not just animals but seeds, a way to regrow crops after the disaster. Ancient Sumerian texts mention that the tablets of divine knowledge, were hidden away before the flood and later recovered. In Egypt, the priests told the historian Solon that their civilization had been destroyed many times before, and that only a few survivors carried the wisdom forward each time. What if we are missing entire civilizations from our history books? Civilizations that may have had their own science, art, and technologies while lost beneath the ocean. Every time a new underwater ruin is discovered, we are forced to rewrite a piece of the past. And yet, we have only explored a tiny fraction of the ocean floor. Who knows what else is waiting to be found? Imagine divers descending into darkness, shining their lights on columns, statues, roads, and temples. Imagine that the answers to the oldest myths are lying right there, hidden under centuries of silence. If these ruins could speak, what stories would they tell? Asterisk, there is a strange pattern hidden in the flood myths. Not only do they warn of destruction, but many of them speak of teachers, mysterious figures who appear after the waters recede. In Mesoamerica, the god Quetzalcoatl is said to have arrived after a great catastrophe, bringing knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, and law. In Mesopotamia, the figure Oannes emerges from the sea itself, half man and half fish, teaching humans how to write, build cities, and govern themselves. In Peru, Viracocha walks across the land after a world-ending flood, giving humans the skills to rebuild before disappearing over the ocean. These myths make us wonder, were these gods just wise survivors from a lost civilization? People who carried fragments of knowledge and shared them with scattered tribes trying to survive? If so, what else did they know? And what did we lose when their world sank beneath the waves? Consider this: in multiple places, ancient monuments are aligned with stars as they appeared 12,000 years ago, before the last great flood. Sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, with its massive carved pillars, seem to mark constellations as they were back then. This suggests that whoever built them had a sophisticated understanding of the sky. Was this knowledge a remnant of pre-flood astronomy? Did they know more about the cycles of Earth, including those that might bring future cataclysms? The idea of a reset is powerful. Some myths describe multiple ages of the world destroyed one after another. The Mayan calendar speaks of previous worlds ended by fire, wind, and water. Hindu tradition tells of cycles called yugas, where humanity rises and falls over immense periods of time. Each time, a chosen few survive to start again. If this is true, we might just be living in the latest version of a very old story. There is also the question of technology. Could there have been machines, tools, or even power sources that we no longer understand? Some researchers point to ancient carvings that seem to depict advanced engineering. Others believe the perfectly cut stones in sites like Pumapunku or Baalbek suggest techniques that go beyond hammer and chisel. If such knowledge existed, why don't we have it now? The flood myths might hold the answer. They tell us that the world was wiped clean, that only fragments remained, and that humanity had to rebuild from scratch. And then there is the warning. Many of these myths are not just stories of survival but cautionary tales. They say the flood came because humanity lost its way. People became corrupt, violent, arrogant. The disaster was both punishment and chance to begin anew. What does that say about us today? If ancient cultures believe that global catastrophe is part of a cycle, does that mean another reset is coming? Modern science shows us that we live on a restless planet. Ice ages come and go. Sea levels rise and fall. Asteroids cross Earth's path. Volcanoes erupt with the power to darken the sky for years. If the flood myths are based on real events, then they are not just history. They are prophecy. Imagine if the ocean rose again. If the cities we live in today vanished like the ones we have only begun to find, future generations might speak of us as a lost civilization. They might tell stories about the glowing towers we built, the machines that could speak, the lights that turned night into day, and how all of it was swept away. But perhaps that is why these myths have survived for so long. They are a message from the past, telling us to pay attention, to prepare, to remember that the world can change in an instant. And maybe, just maybe, we are the ones chosen to carry that message forward. So the next time you hear the story of Noah, or Utnapishtim, or Manu, or the Hopi elders, remember that you are listening to something much older than religion, something buried deep in the memory of humanity itself. A story that says, we have been here before, we have faced the end, and we survived.